massive miscarriage of justice almost, that we haven't been able to enjoy what could have been, like, arguably the biggest waste of talent.
They were supposed to be the future. Teenage sensations who beat legends, reached impossible finals, and had the entire darting world convinced they'd own the sport for the next decade. But then, something went wrong. Careers derailed by scandal, mental battles, or choices that destroyed everything they'd built. Today we're diving into 8 Wonderkids who shocked the world and then vanished, leaving behind nothing but questions and what-ifs. These aren't just stories about losing form, these are tales of complete collapse, where promise turned to tragedy faster than anyone could have imagined. Cory Cadby wasn't your typical rising star. This kid from Tasmania had an attitude that made veterans uncomfortable, and a game that backed up every word. In 2016, at just 20 years old, he stepped onto the stage at the Perth Masters and did the unthinkable. Phil Taylor, the greatest player who ever lived, stood across from him. Most rookies would have been honoured just to share the oi. Cadby destroyed him, a blistering 103 average, a 6-2 scoreline, and suddenly the darting world had a new name to remember. They called him the King, and for a moment, it looked like the crown actually fit. Weeks later, Cadby captured the PDC World Youth Championship, cementing his status as the sport's next big thing. He had swagger, he had skill, and he had zero fear. When he stormed through Q-School qualifiers in early 2018 and crushed Rob Cross with a 108 average, people started asking if this was the player who'd finally challenged Van Gerwen's dominance. Then came the UK Open. Cadby tore through the draw, taking down Gerwen Price and Robert Owen like they were amateurs. He reached the final and faced Gary Anderson under the brightest lights in darts. Cadby lost 11-7, but nobody cared about the score. A kid from Tasmania had just announced himself on the biggest stage, and the future looked limitless. But while Cadby looked unstoppable on stage, chaos was brewing behind the scenes. His UK visa turned into a nightmare. Delays, complications, bureaucratic hell. He missed months of crucial tournaments, stuck at home in Australia, when he should have been building momentum in Europe. In interviews, he admitted the uncertainty crushed him financially and mentally. The king wanted to rule, but he couldn't even get into the country where the throne sat. Then the darker stories started surfacing. A video appeared online showing Cadby in a street altercation, throwing punches and kicking a man who was already down. Fans were stunned. This wasn't the confident young champion they cheered. This was something else entirely. Rumours swirled about legal troubles back in Australia, with whispers suggesting his criminal record was part of why his visa issues dragged on for so long. Whether every rumour was true didn't matter. The damage to his reputation was done. By 2019, Cadby finally secured a visa and looked ready to reset everything. But the fire was gone. The momentum had evaporated. In 2023, he made one final push, dominating Q-School to win back his PDC tour card. It should have been a comeback story. Instead, he never showed up to a single tournament. By early 2024, the PDC quietly stripped his card, and with it went the last trace of the king. Cory Cadby had everything a champion needed, except the one thing that mattered most: stability to hold it together. He beat Phil Taylor, reached a major final, and looked destined for greatness. Instead, he's remembered as one of the biggest wastes of talent the sport has ever seen. If Cadby's downfall was chaotic, the next player's story is something far darker. A scandal so shocking it ended a career before it truly began. Leighton Bennett was a legitimate phenomenon. At just 13 years old, he became the youngest ever BDO World Youth Champion in 2019. That alone would have been remarkable, but Bennett didn't stop there. He went out and beat Phil Taylor, the greatest player of all time, in an exhibition match. Headlines exploded worldwide. This wasn't just another talented kid. This was someone who looked destined to define the next generation of darts. Fans started dreaming about a future rivalry between Bennett and another rising prodigy, Luke Littler. Some even compared it to what Phil Taylor and Michael van Gerwen had been. The hype was real, and Bennett seemed ready to deliver. By 16, Bennett had joined the PDC and was throwing 9 darters, competing fearlessly with players twice his age. Everything pointed toward a glittering career. Sponsors backed him, fans adored him, and the trajectory seemed unstoppable. Then 2024 happened. and everything came crashing down in the most brutal way imaginable. During the Modus Super Series, suspicious betting patterns linked to Bennett's matches triggered an investigation by the Darts Regulation Authority. He was suspended immediately. Months later, the verdict stunned everyone. Bennett was found guilty on 10 different counts of match fixing across 4 separate matches. He'd also been caught giving inside information to gamblers, working with an unregistered agent, and refusing to fully cooperate with investigators. The punishment was devastating, an 8-year ban, effectively ending his career at just 18 years old. On top of that came a fine exceeding £8,000. Sponsors dropped him overnight. Target Darts, who had backed him since his early teens, severed ties instantly and released a statement calling the situation deeply disappointing. Video clips of the matches under scrutiny quickly went viral, and they were damning. In one game, Bennett had a 164 checkout, and bizarrely threw a dart nowhere near the board. In another, he needed 47 to win, and missed the double 16 by such a ridiculous margin that even casual fans could tell something was wrong. Some argued it looked clumsy, but most agreed it was deliberate. The verdict split opinions across the sport. Many felt the ban was absolutely deserved, a necessary message that match fixing has no place in darts. But others, including top player James Wade, believed 8 years was far too harsh for someone so young. Wade argued that Bennett deserved a chance at rehabilitation, not a sentence that would keep him out until 2032, when he'd be 26 years old, but the DRA wasn't forgiving. For fans, it was heartbreaking. Here was a teenager who had beaten Phil Taylor, who looked set to challenge Luke Littler for supremacy, who represented the future of darts, and he threw it all away in a scandal that will follow him forever. Where most Wonderkids on this list faded slowly, Bennett didn't fade at all. He was exiled, thrown out of the sport, at the exact age he was supposed to be taking it over. Kirk Shepherd's story might be the strangest of them all, a fairy tale that turned into a lifelong curse. Back in 2008, Shepherd was a 21-year-old qualifier, working in a sheet metal factory, given odds of 1,000 to 1 to win the World Championship. Nobody expected anything from him. And yet, match after match, he survived. He knocked out big names like Terry Jenkins, Peter Manley, and Wayne Mardle, somehow clawing his way into the PDC World Championship final. What made his run even more remarkable was how ordinary it looked on paper. Shepherd never averaged above 90 in the entire tournament. Not once. But he always did just enough to win. It was scrappy, improbable, and had the entire darts world asking who this guy even was. Suddenly, the factory worker from Ramsgate, who'd been playing county darts just months earlier, was standing on stage at Alexandra Palace, facing John Part for the world title. Shepherd lost that final 7-2, but for most people, that didn't matter. The story of an unknown kid reaching the final became one of the most memorable world championships in history. Overnight, he went from complete obscurity to darting celebrity. Commentators said the run would change his life forever, and it did, but not in the way anyone expected. Because after 2008, Shepherd never came close to repeating that success. The pressure of being the surprise finalist weighed on him heavily. Every time he stepped onto the Oi, opponents and fans expected the same magic. Instead, he struggled with form, battled confidence issues, and faced the brutal reality that his one great run had raised expectations he couldn't possibly meet. To make matters worse, Shepherd developed dartitis, one of the cruelest conditions in the sport. It's where the throw breaks down under pressure, making it nearly impossible to release the dart naturally. For a player already trying to prove himself, it was devastating. In interviews years later, Shepherd opened up about what happened after that £50,000 payday. He admitted he quit his factory job, got carried away by sudden wealth, and spiraled into gambling and drinking. From earning 50 grand as a world championship runner-up to living alone in a rundown one-bed flat just 4 years later, he told reporters, "The devil came for me. I went a bit doolally and got carried away by it all." By the 2010s, Shepherd was drifting in and out of the tour, fighting to hold on to his place, but never finding consistent results. Finally, in 2022, Shepherd handed back his tour card and stepped away from top-level darts for good. For fans, Kirk Shepherd will always be remembered as the 1000-to-1 outsider who somehow reached the World Championship final. But for Shepherd himself, that magical run may have been both a blessing and a curse. It gave him a night in the spotlight most players could only dream of, but it also set an impossible standard he could never live up to again. And in his own words, he wishes it had never happened at all. While Shepherd's career burned bright and then imploded, the next player's story is quieter. A slow, silent disappearance that left people wondering what could have been. James Hubbard's career is the story of a talent who rose fast, looked unstoppable for a moment, and then slowly slipped out of sight. Born in 1992, he grabbed attention in 2011 when he started playing PDC events. Just a year later, he shocked the darts world by winning the PDC World Youth Championship, and his opponent in that final makes it even more impressive, Michael van Gerwen. That victory wasn't just a win, it was symbolic. Two of the brightest young players in the world going head to head, and Hubbard came out on top. Suddenly, he was one of the sport's hottest prospects. He earned his tour card and quickly made an impact. In 2012, Hubbard stepped onto the biggest stage at the PDC World Championship and stunned everyone by knocking out the reigning champion Adrian Lewis in the second round. Pundits started calling him the future of English darts, a player destined to rise through the rankings and challenge for majors. But the momentum never quite carried over. After that incredible 2012, Hubbard struggled to consistently perform at the highest level. He had flashes of brilliance, big wins against established names, deep runs in Players' Championship events, but they were never followed by the kind of sustained success that defines a top player. Year by year, his presence on the tour grew thinner. The pressure of living up to that early hype began to take its toll. Hubbard admitted in interviews that the expectation weighed heavily on him. Unlike some players who thrive under the spotlight, he seemed to fade beneath it. By the mid-2010s, he was no longer considered a rising star, but rather another talent who hadn't quite fulfilled his potential. By 2018, his appearances in top-level tournaments had become rare, and soon after, he disappeared from the PDC entirely. For fans who remembered that fearless youngster beating Van Gerwen and Lewis, it was a strange and disappointing ending. The player who once carried the hopes of English darts had quietly slipped out of the picture with no dramatic exit, no headline scandal, just a slow, silent fade. James Hubbard's story isn't one of chaos or controversy. It's a quieter tragedy, the kind where raw potential simply evaporates under the weight of expectation. He showed the world he could beat the very best, but for reasons never fully clear. Whether it was confidence, consistency, or pressure, he never stayed at that level. While Hubbard's decline was gradual, the next player's story involves a meteoric rise, followed by an abrupt end. Jamie Lewis was never supposed to make it as far as he did. For years, he'd been seen as a solid professional, talented and dangerous on his day, but not quite among the elite. Then came the 2018 World Championship. Entering as a qualifier who barely scraped into the tournament, Lewis played with a freedom that stunned everyone. He blasted through opponents with heavy scoring and relentless finishing, storming all the way to the semi-finals at Alexandra Palace. On that stage, Lewis produced some of the best darts of his career, averaging over 100 in multiple matches and looking every bit like a future contender for major titles. Even though he fell short in the semi-final against Phil Taylor, losing 6-1, Lewis had made his mark. At just 26 years old, he seemed to have arrived. He'd earned £85,000 in 2 weeks, more than he'd won in the entire previous year combined. But what followed was a sharp and painful decline. After that magical run, Lewis struggled to replicate the same level. His form dipped, his confidence looked shattered, and results dried up completely. By 2019, he was losing early in tournaments, often unable to find the consistency that had once carried him past the world's best. The highs of 2018 quickly faded into the background, and something deeper seemed wrong. In 2020, things hit rock bottom. At the International Darts Open, Lewis lost 6-0 to Robert Marjanovic and averaged just 57 points. 57. It was one of the worst performances ever recorded by a tour card holder, and it signaled that something was seriously broken. Lewis later opened up about what he'd been going through. He revealed he'd been battling severe anxiety and depression, struggling with the mental strain of competing at the top level. The pressure, the expectations, the constant travel, it had all become too much. In 2020, still in his prime years, Lewis announced he was stepping away from professional darts to focus on his private life. The exact reasons were never fully detailed, but the decision stunned fans. Here was a player who had reached the semi-finals of the biggest tournament in the world, now gone from the tour altogether. Lewis did eventually return, securing another World Championship spot through qualifiers. But he lost his tour card in 2021 and has since been playing on the WDF circuit, far from the spotlight he once commanded. Jamie Lewis's story is a reminder of how quickly things can change. In one moment, he was the fearless qualifier lighting up Ali Pali. In the next, he was gone, leaving behind questions about what might have been if he'd managed to hold on to that form, or if the mental battles hadn't taken such a heavy toll. For Benito van der Paar, the fall from grace wasn't sudden either. It was a slow, painful unraveling that left everyone wondering what went wrong. When the Dutchman first burst onto the PDC scene in 2014, he looked like the next big thing from the Netherlands. Tall, confident, and powerful on stage, he quickly started racking up Players' Championship titles and reaching quarter-finals in major events like the World Match Play and UK Open. Between 2015 and 2017, Van der Paar was everywhere, dangerous in floor events, climbing the rankings, beating established stars, and showing the kind of steady progression that usually leads to even bigger things. In 2016 alone, he won 3 Pro Tour events and earned over £237,000 in prize money. At his peak, he was ranked 13th in the world, and fans assumed he would follow in the footsteps of Dutch legends like Michael van Gerwen. But instead, the momentum stopped dead. From 2018 onwards, Van der Paar's form collapsed. He went from being a regular on TV to barely scraping results in early rounds. His confidence seemed to evaporate, his scoring power dulled, and opponents who once feared him now found easy wins. The decline was hard to watch, and whispers began to spread that something deeper was wrong. Later, Van der Paar opened up about battling depression, admitting that the pressure and struggles of life on tour had affected him heavily. He tried changing darts, altering his equipment, and pushing for a comeback, but nothing seemed to work. His earnings plummeted from over £200,000 at his peak to just $10,500 in 2020. Commentators started calling him a forgotten thrower, a brutal but accurate description of how far he'd fallen. By the end of 2020, Van der Paar lost his tour card. He's attempted to win it back at Q School multiple times since, but without success. Unlike others whose careers ended suddenly, Van der Paar's decline was drawn out, a slow slide from contender to afterthought. For fans, it was frustrating to see a player with such clear ability unable to find his way back. He had the talent, the experience, and the stage presence. But in the end, none of it was enough to stop the downward spiral. He's only 31 years old, but his career appears finished. Another cautionary tale about how quickly things can fall apart in professional darts. While Van der Paar's story is one of mysterious collapse, the final player on this list represents something different, a story that's still being written. Keegan Brown's journey is one of hope, heartbreak, and quiet resilience. Nicknamed the Needle, he burst onto the scene in 2014 by winning the PDC World Youth Championship. That win alone put him in the spotlight, but what really grabbed people's attention was who he beat along the way. Big names, established players who suddenly found themselves outplayed by a young man who was supposed to be just starting out. For a while, Brown lived up to the hype. He climbed into the world's top 32, played in world championships, and showed he had the scoring power and composure to hang with anyone. Commentators often praised his calm presence on stage, noting that he never seemed fazed by the big lights or the big names standing across from him. In 2014, he even reached the quarterfinals of the Grand Slam of Darts, beating the legendary Raymond van Barneveld along the way. But as the years rolled on, the consistency faded. His form dipped, early exits piled up, and his ranking slipped lower and lower. Unlike some of the others on this list, Brown didn't disappear suddenly. He just seemed to slowly lose his edge. What made Brown's story different was his honesty. In an emotional interview after a World Championship match, he opened up about struggling with anxiety and depression. He admitted publicly that the mental side of the game had become his biggest battle, that sometimes he questioned whether he still belonged at the top level. Brown also works as a medical laboratory assistant at a hospital on the Isle of Wight, and during the COVID pandemic, he significantly increased his shifts to help with testing efforts. His practice time plummeted from 30 hours a week to almost nothing for months. That dedication to his job came at a cost to his darts career, but it showed the kind of person Brown is, someone who puts others first, even when it hurts his own dreams. Despite the setbacks, Brown has never given up. He lost his tour card at the end of 2022, but fought his way back through Q School in 2023, showing flashes of his old form with a quarter-final run at a European Tour event. However, 2024 was brutal, and he lost his card again. Unlike the others on this list who walked away or were forced out, Brown keeps fighting. He's still trying to rediscover his passion, still working to prove himself. Keegan Brown stands as a reminder that talent alone doesn't guarantee success, and that in darts, the mental game can be just as important as the physical one. His story isn't finished yet, and there's still hope that the needle can find his way back. 8 Wonderkids, 8 stories of talent, hype, and promise cut short by scandal, pressure, chaos, or the weight of expectation. Cory Cadby, the fearless prodigy who beat Phil Taylor but was destroyed by off-board turmoil and legal troubles. Leighton Bennett, the teenage sensation whose career was obliterated by match-fixing before it even truly began. Kirk Shepherd, the miracle finalist who could never escape the shadow of his own fairy tale and admits he wishes it never happened. James Hubbard, the quiet fade from youth champion to forgotten name. Jamie Lewis, who reached the semi-finals on the biggest stage, then walked away broken by anxiety. Benito van der Paar, the Dutch powerhouse who lost his form and fought demons away from the board. And Keegan Brown, the youth champion, still searching for the player he once was, still fighting when others would have quit. These stories share a common thread. Darts is unforgiving. For every Luke Littler or Michael van Gerwen who rises and stays at the top, there are countless prodigies who stumble, vanish, or never quite reach the heights expected of them. Some are destroyed by their own choices, others by circumstances beyond their control, some by the invisible weight of mental struggles that nobody sees until it's too late. And that leaves one lingering question hanging over the sport. Who will be the next Wonderkid to disappear?